Hello, students. Fundamentals of Therapeutic Massage, Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is a terminology chapter that ends up talking to you about professional record keeping. We talked about record keeping and the importance of it from Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, and now Chapter 4. So, when a chapter is focusing on terminology, that means this is a language to learn. This chapter pairs up with chapter 3 in Essential Science. So chapter 3 is the way the course is laid out, chapter 3 is going to give you an introduction, and then this is going to do the repetition and then add in other levels of terminology. Here we go. First, we got to understand massage terminology, which is not consistent. So there are going to be times when you have to know multiple terms for the same thing. Then we're going to look at quality of life terminology so that we understand really what well-being is, what is a standard of living, and how those qualities of well-being can be used to determine outcome goals and quantifiable and qualifiable measurements for a client. We also, as massage therapists, have to be comfortable with cultural, gender neutral, and age appropriate terms. People first terminology, that's respectful terminology, and then medical terminology. So this is an overview, and obviously is going to lead in and support your essential science study. From there, then we're going to look at this documentation process. Chapter objectives, key terms. Terms. You know, this is the language you need to understand and use, because this is how we're going to communicate. And part of the issue within massage is it moves into a multidisciplinary setting or referral networks, is that we don't always speak enough of the same language so that we understand each other. So that's what this is about, and it talks about the research that's going on at the NIH and the overarching term that they are using called force-based manipulations. The massage terminology is also a situation that is sometimes a conundrum, especially for me as an author. But we do have a terminology base, and it comes out of the entry-level analysis project, and that is the terminology that is used in the textbook, and it is the primary terminology that is used on the MBLEX. Occasionally, a more historical, classical Swedish massage term may show up. So gliding is effleurage, and kneading is petrissage, and percussion is tapotement. So, and it's always a little confusing to me that we have French words for a Swedish massage system. But anyway. Okay. Slow down with box 4.1 because it's giving you an idea of how language is built. And then the two formal projects the massage therapy community has had in relationship to this content. So here is the language used in the ELAP documents. And this is what we use throughout the book. And this box here has to do with mechanical force and the actual physics behind what we do and why it makes a difference to the body tissues. So this will be reinforced over and over, and this is the language you will primarily encounter on the MBLEX exam. So ultimately what happens is soft tissue deformation. Deformation means a change in shape. A mechanical force would also cause something to move, like kicking a ball, but that's not what we primarily do. We are applying a mechanical force into the tissue for a change in the tissue shape that then stimulates a neural response that goes in through the sensory, peripheral sensory motor, motor nerves, sensory nerves into the spinal column, up into the brain stem, depending on where it's processed. And then the response to restore homeostasis comes out through the motor nerves, and then something happens. Fluid is moved, or things get thinner, or tension tone decreases, or a pain signal happens to tell, so that you stop doing something or whatever. So this is important. This box here is important so that you truly can appreciate the underlying mechanisms of what is happening. And then the mechanical forces are created by these various methods. There's a note here. It says hot, cold methods do not specifically deform soft tissue, but they're very often an adjunct that is involved that is allowed in the scope of practice of massage. What's an approach? What's a form what's a form and a style? And this is where we get a little confused. We might use Swedish classical massage terminology, but that is a very specific approach. So we can't use that language to talk about the overall therapeutic massage application. Same with reflexology or manual lymph drain or whatever. These are all styles. They use all of these methods and all these forces, but they sometimes will have their own unique language. Focus on Professionalism talks about this language issue and how that is shifting and changing, and how we need to be using the most current language. We also have to be careful that we don't use, all right, we are working on attempting to communicate. It truly is amazing because the words can have multiple meanings, and our inflection and the context of the language and body language, all of that makes a big difference with that. It's important that we have respectful language, and our society is grappling with this. We have people first terminology, we have gender neutral terminology, and it's changing because we're trying to figure it out. The people first terminology and the quality of life terminology is pretty good, but the gender respectful terminology is still evolving. So here's our quality of life. You will have encountered this already in Essential Science. And it works really good for us to collect data and frame questions for our clients as we are doing an intake, or trying to find out more information about what's going on with them. So here they are again, and examples of how you can use the language to develop outcome goals for the client. Very helpful language base to be able to use. And then here's an example of how quality of life terminology can be a useful tool for performing and documenting history and assessment of a client. And then here's our culture competency and gender neutral language, age appropriate terms. This is evolving. We're trying to figure it out. For my age range, we don't have society hasn't decided yet what the term is. Old, older, elder, mature. It's kind of all over the place, and we're the fastest growing segment of the population. So that's going to be easy. It's going to be interesting to see how that works itself out. We need to be comfortable asking questions. This caught my attention right here, cultural humility. It's all right to not know. It's okay to ask a question, especially when that question is from a sincere place of wanting to understand. Um, Sometimes people have to explain themselves over and over and over, and that can get weary. Uh, so I recall I was in a long-term relationship with somebody who was blind and used a leader dog. And sometimes he was just very engaging with the public, would want to come up and talk about the dog and all that kind of stuff, and all the weird things people do. Like they talked to the dog instead of talked to Brad, and they talked louder, and every once in a while he would lose his patience and he would say, "Oh, for goodness sakes, I'm blind, not deaf," kind of a thing. So if somebody is a little sharp with you and your intention was clear, then be great, give them some grace and be forgiving. They may have asked or been asked that question 10 times already today, and you don't know that. So again, here is this gender neutral and age appropriate term. So here's where it's the, older adult, it's senior, elders. Elder is not necessarily recommended. Some cultures really like the word elder. I don't have an answer for it. So here is some up to date. These two sites should be continually updated related to the most current terminology recommendations. And then this is our people first language. Most often, this is in relationship to somebody having a disability, and it has been in the evolution stage since the Americans for Disability Act that was enacted years and years ago. But it really boils down to seeing the person first. It's the person first always, and then if necessary, there would be an indication of the situation that they are coping with. So if I give you an example of myself here, it's dyslexic Sandy. All right, so now I am first seen as somebody with dyslexia. And you've all been in class with me enough to experience this. I absolutely do have dyslexia, and I cope with it, and it is the way it is. But it's not who I am. I'm Sandy, and part of how I function in the world has to do with the dyslexia. That's the bottom line here. So read through this, and then here is the CDC website that should be current. And when I did the revision of the textbook, this was still the current language structure. So language, language, language. And you have to break a habit sometimes. You're used to saying a certain thing a certain way, and you can't do that anymore. It's not respectful, and we want to be respectful. Then we get into the medical terminology, and this is connected to Appendix A in the textbook here. that has to do with indications and contraindications and how you're going to chew on this language and by using it. So again, you had this already in Essential Science, and here it is again. Your prefixes, your root words, your suffixes, and how you put those together to create all kinds of new words to describe things. So here's a proficiency exercise to do that. And then I want to caution you about abbreviations. There's not any real standardized abbreviation. Some are more common than others. But if you're going to use an abbreviation, it either needs to be standardized to that environment. It gets very interesting when you're transmitting electronically. Records are transmitted from one place to the other, and they don't always use the same abbreviations. An upside is with electronic documentation and charting that the program itself is gonna kind of work with this idea of what's an appropriate abbreviation or not. I suggest you write it out. These are terms related to diagnoses and diseases. This is overlap into your Essential Science all the way through this whole section. So compare and contrast this to the chapter in Essential Science, because while they're very, very similar, there are also little nuances that are different. And then this is taking you out to a medical dictionary, and it's asking you to find the definitions for these words. And that's part of the exercise in the retention and recall. So lots of words, novel repetition, same thing over and over, different voice, different way, different mechanism. So you've got an appendix B here that gives you all kinds of, or it gives you a system for review of muscles as well as in your anatomy textbook. And then just like in your Essential Science book, bringing the rest of the body systems kind of in together. Nervous system. These should be familiar words to you because you've already had this in Essential Science. And if you notice that you are skipping over it and you don't know what it is, then that cues you to search for it in the textbook using the search feature. Go look on a Google search, just make sure that it's a good resource. Medline Plus has a medical dictionary, and you can go look it up there. So here's a proficiency exercise, and all of these are built around taking new information, manipulating it, recalling it, and that's how you integrate this type of content. And down we go. So the baseline for all of this is the last segment, which we are headed towards here, which is documentation. And this is an introduction. You have had exposure to this, and this is a evolving process, this documentation process. So you're going to get better at it as you do it. And there's lots of different styles, and it's changing related to electronic record keeping. But if you can use the model SOAP note, you can adapt to any other model that's out there. So as always, slow down, pay attention to the boxes. And this is the different type of records, different names kind of for the same thing. Ultimately, they're all a problem-oriented medical record. And, so here we got that term medical again. In a wellness setting, it would be client record or session record. And then what the client tells you, what you observe, what you do and how it works, and then where you would go next with this. So here, progress notes or session note charting. Here we go again, more. The idea that we talked about with confidentiality in chapter 2. And then narrowing it down to look at documentation in the massage therapy practice. So here is a little bit more explanation on the thinking process of a SOAP note and how to organize your thinking, some of the different methods. But ultimately, it's a it's a critical thinking, problem-solving approach. You need to develop quantifiable and qualifiable goals, long-term and short-term. A quantity has a number to it. Qualifiable is something that the person can do and they can recognize that they are able to do it. So I'll give you some examples and then ask you to write some. And then we have our intake, and we have the initial intake the first time we see a client. And then we still have an intake every time we see a client over and over in a retention process. But it wouldn't be as all-encompassing as an initial intake would be. And typically in the medical setting, they will have you redo a comprehensive intake procedure every 6 months or every 12 months. And so you build a database. So that's your intake plus each of your charting records that starts to build out the client's file, whether it's electronic or it is paper. So we have some forms that we use, and there are a lot of different kinds of forms. It doesn't have to be this form, but this is an example of an additional initial health history form. It also has other names. And then we have an example of what might be used as a physical assessment form, kind of leads us through. So this is what we measure and look at. And then we need to analyze the data that we found, what the client has told us. That's here on this form, what we have identified more objectively and measured. Then we review that data, and this is part of the critical thinking process. Then we analyze it, and we eventually come up with what we're going to do. In the real world, you don't usually see this happen. This happens in your head. While you're learning it, it's important to be able to externalize it, like write it down and be able to say it. One of my grandkids, he can solve all kinds of math problems in his head. And I don't know if he knows how he does it or not, but the teacher wants him to show his work so that she, it happens to be a she, is able to look at it and identify the thought process as well as he is able to look at it and see how he does what he does. When we teach massage, we have to do that because you do massage so much as an educator, it it becomes a routine, it becomes a pattern, it becomes habitualized. It's not that way for a student, right? Not that way for you. So we have to externalize it. We have to bring it out. We have to bring it into pieces. And that's a real challenge to do that. And then the 4 goals that are evidence informed are relaxation, well-being, stress management, pain management, and mobility, functional mobility. And this charting process is built out of the medical structure. So it starts with the idea of identification of a problem. But not everything we work on as a massage therapist is a problem. Sometimes it is and it is better described as an outcome or a goal than a problem. Not always is something wrong. And we think of a problem as something wrong, but it's more, it's better thought of as something, how to get to an end result. So here's the care treatment plan, 2 words for the same thing. This is our best educated guess on how we would work for a client that we're going to see more than once. If we're going to only see a client once, like if you were working in a resort area and the person's there on vacation, they're coming in for a massage, you're going to do a general full body massage. The outcome is going to be wellness and relaxation, because any of the others require a broader, more longer term intervention process and maintenance. So that's a simpler documentation structure for that one-time massage, and you can't really work on a headache or anything else with that. It's one time. So, but the rest of the goals, stress management, pain management, etc., that would be developed in an ongoing care plan. So it's the best educated guess on how you're going to do this. And here is a form related to that. And then as the plan is implemented and recorded sequentially, session by session, that is your client documentation, i.e. SOAP note. So here's more again. And then here is an example, and I call this a SOAP note with training wheels. And this is the one that's in your textbook because it gives you clues throughout it about what goes where. We'll expose you to multiple types of charting while you're in school, because I don't know what you're gonna use when you get out. But the goal is that you can adapt to any charting style that is, that you want to use or is required to be used. So here's an actual example, and then a little bit more on computer records. All right. And that's our terminology chapter. And there are the questions. All right. Let me stop the share. And we're at the end of Unit 1. And this creates an overview and a way of thinking and a way of acting and a way of being. At Health Enrichment Center, you have also been learning to do massage. So you have also been working in the textbook and other units. So as you encounter these chapters throughout your learning, it either sets you up, like I just did, possibly for charting and documentation, or if it's presented closer to the end of the program, it acts as a review. So that's the nature of that scaffold spiral curriculum. You just got to keep coming back at this. The learning strategy for terminology is repetition, repetition, repetition. There's tons of stuff on YouTube and on the web where you can get free medical terminology classes. I think there's one on Medline Plus. Also, all of the videos that I post for you, both for fundamentals and for essential science, uh, are going, as you listen to them, you're going to reinforce and reinforce, and watch. You're going to reinforce the terminology because you're going to hear it over and over multiple times. Here's to learning the language. It is what it is.